Thank you so much, Steve. Can you all hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I am not at all familiar with this platform, um, so I appreciate you all taking care of me today. Thanks for inviting me to be with you today and to talk to you a little bit. And I hope that you all will find at least a little nugget of value in what I have to share. Now, I do not speak Weather Service language, so if I say something that you may not understand, please let me know. Since I have a short amount of time today, I'm just going to jump right into the crux of the conversation. In the emergency management world, we are starting to see a real shift in focus from separating folks into the general population versus high-risk population buckets to looking more at it from a whole person point of view. What will I do if the power goes out? What if the driving is hazardous? Do I have enough food to get by for a few days? These are considerations for all of us, and our high-risk individuals are no different. So the title I have on here, Winter Weather Considerations for High-Risk Populations, is really a little misleading. Next slide, please. In talking with Steve, I know that you all use the Social Vulnerability Index and other data sets to try to identify those high risk or what you might call vulnerable population pockets. But rather than thinking about it in narrow terms and trying to separate folks out, such as our seniors or those folks with limited English proficiency, people with disabilities, or maybe those that are electric dependent, try thinking about it this way. An individual who is more high risk for a bad outcome due to winter weather is anybody who needs assistance because of any condition or circumstance that creates a barrier to them understanding or to their ability to act or react to information that they receive. So if we change our perception really about who is high risk, this allows you all to start reframing how you communicate generally instead of targeting specific groups. Next slide, please. Now, I work exclusively with seniors and adults with disabilities, but there are other groups that are high risk for adverse outcomes from extreme winter weather. For simplicity, we place these folks into what I call population buckets. So you have the economically disadvantaged. Those are folks who are low wage earners or maybe they're seasonal workers. Now, economic disadvantage does not necessarily impair the ability of an individual to understand the information, but it can significantly affect their ability to follow a directive if they don't have the resources or the means to do so. For example, they may not be able to stockpile food. They might not be able to stay off the roads if it's bad because they simply can't afford to lose a day's pay. Language and literacy is another population bucket. And this includes members of our communities who have a limited ability to read, speak, or understand English. But it also includes folks who can't read at all, either English or their native language. So you need to keep in mind with your messaging that we have a lot of individuals that either due to their limited English proficiency or maybe they have a cognitive issue as a result of an accident or an illness, they rely on their children or their grandchildren to read messages to them. So those messages have to be clear enough that a 5th or 6th grader can read it. That's something that we forget a lot in our communication. The medical and disability bucket, I think that's what most of us are more familiar with as far as being high risk. These are the folks who have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits a major life activity. These are our folks who are blind, they're deaf, they're hard of hearing, maybe they have limited mobility, or maybe they have a condition that makes them dependent on electricity. This is the population bucket that is more visible, and this is the one that folks more often think about when they think about high-risk populations. We also have the isolation bucket, right? This is geographical, cultural, or social. Individuals can be isolated in so many ways that you may not even think about in your profession, in your job. We've got a lot of farmers, we've got ranchers, we have people who live in sparsely populated communities. And what we need to think about is some of these folks depend on cable television. They don't get local news, they don't get a weather station. So how are they going to know what you all are putting out there? Here in Missouri, we also have a huge Amish and Mennonite population. They don't rely on mass media communication at all. So they don't get the message printed or spoken at all on the mass media. Now you may have noticed that there is no bucket that contains seniors or older adults. This is because age in and of itself doesn't make someone more high risk for an adverse outcome. However, many older adults fall within these other buckets. As we age, we may become hard of hearing, we may start to have limited mobility, and that's what puts them in these other buckets. But their age in and of itself does not make them more high risk. So again, rather than you all developing messages and targeting specific individuals, think about the community as a whole. You want one clear, concise, easy to read message that can be passed on to people like me and other what we call trusted sources in order to pass it on to the folks who fall into these buckets, right? You all have a ton of great products. It just takes getting them into the hands of these trusted sources in order to get that information out to these higher risk populations. Now, I want to give you just a little example of how this worked for me. What I get from you all is several pages in that weather message packet, that packet that gives me key messages, updates, those maps. You all know what I'm talking about. I'm not using weather service language, but you all know what I'm talking about. If it's something that looks like it's going to impact seniors or adults with disabilities, I take your information and I break it down to the bare bones for these folks. I get it down to 2 or 3 sentences. Generally speaking, our high-risk individuals, they don't care about why it's happening. They just want to know what is happening. And they also don't care about what's happening another town over. They're only interested in their little world. So the information that you already provide is great for folks like me who do emergency planning, but not so much for the average Joe. But I don't really think that you're looking to target the average Joe. You just need a plan for reaching them. How do you reach these folks? That's where your partnerships with your state and local government agencies and your NGOs that work with these high-risk populations come into play, because we do know how to reach them. That's what we do for a living, and these are the folks that we work with every day. Now, on the survey that was just talked about, you have your emergency managers, you work heavily with those, you work heavily with schools, you work heavily with transportation. I fall into that other category, right? So just think about that. Folks like me are in that other category. Next slide, please. So when we talk about these state, local, and NGO partners, those are the folks that go into that other category. And this is where there's an opportunity for awareness. Making sure that those potential partners are aware of and have access to your products is critical. You, as the National Weather Service, you have to be visible to us, to the others, right? And again, I'm going to use myself as an example. The population that I work with, they need extra time to prepare when a storm is coming that might produce a power outage or hazardous travel. Some of our folks depend on home delivered meals. Now, our providers can deliver those meals in advance, but they need to plan for that, right? They can't just wake up today and realize that tomorrow they're not going to be able to run their route because of snow or ice or whatever the situation is. They have to have time to prepare those meals, line up drivers, schedule the deliveries, et cetera, et cetera. I myself was struggling with how to give them as much notice as possible, because in the beginning, I was only getting your messages about 3 days in advance of a storm. And I went to a conference or a workshop or something somewhere, and I met Andy Bailey. I don't know how many of you know Andy, but I met Andy, and I sat in on a presentation that he gave that was directed towards those emergency managers. After that presentation, I was talking to him about my concern with that short notice, and he just said, Marcia, I can just fix you up. We have products that can help you. He connected me with the National Weather Service chat. He put me on to that, those 6 to 10 and 18 to 14 day, those extended outlooks you have. I had no idea those tools even existed. Those products have been extremely helpful to me in being able to get that notice out to our folks in advance. This gives them the heads up and gives them time to prepare and to reach out to those other high-risk people to make sure that everybody's got a plan to survive this event. Andy also included me on whatever kind of list he has, so that I'm notified when there's like a special weather live feed or an alert, so that I can maintain that situational awareness. So when we talk about trusted sources, when we talk about those others, the folks that are in that other category, it is rarely a government agency that our higher risk folks trust for information. I'm just here to tell you. Instead, they look to their local health department, they look to their food pantries, their soup kitchens, their homeless shelters. They look to their churches or their mosques or whatever religious denomination they are. They look to their healthcare providers. In some populations, some at-risk populations, those trusted sources are the barbers and the hairstylists and the convenience store owners. these are the people that's going to get the message out to our at-risk populations. We know that reaching people through the channels that they trust is much more effective than through mainstream channels. And most of you probably already work with the emergency managers in your area. Unfortunately, most emergency managers don't know how to reach these high-risk groups either. So you all need to think outside the box when it comes to who should know about and have access to your products. Now, Missouri has a great network of state-level committees that have a lot of these trusted individuals as members. Most other states also have these similar state-level committees, whether it's the Access and Functional Needs Committee, or whether it's the VOAD Committee, which is Volunteer Organizations Active in Disaster. I am going to assume that most of you already have partnerships with your state-level committees. If you don't, please know that every state has a liaison that works with these state agencies and these committees and organizations, and I can help you find that person if you don't know who it is in your state. Next slide, please. So the final thing that Steve wanted me to touch on was need. He said, what do folks like me who work with these high-risk populations and are high-risk individuals themselves, what do they need from you? What do they need from the National Weather Service? And again, our high-risk individuals need the same thing we all need: simple, concise, easy to understand messages, which I think for the most part you have. And secondly, time. We need that advanced time for preparation to get the word out to our staff, to our providers, to our clients, to the folks that are in those high-risk buckets. I also think you have the tools for that. Folks just don't know about it. So I would encourage you to become more visible to the trusted sources in your area. And again, think outside the box, think outside school, EMDs, transportation. Connect with those state-level committees. Let them know what you have to offer and how it will make it easier for them. They will help you get this information into the hands of the folks who need it, because that's what we do. Next slide, please. So I know that I went over all of that pretty quickly. This is my contact information. Disaster response is all I do. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. It's always easier to get me via email than it is on the phone. But if you have any questions, anything I can help you with, if I can help connect you to the others that are in your state that need your messages, I am happy to work that for you. Phil, I'm going to turn it back over to you or to Steve or whoever's running the show.